What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 435 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher here with Drew Dinkmeyer to break down the NBA trade deadline. We talked about the big Luka Doncic and De'Aaron Fox trades. So we're going to talk winners and losers from the week. We'll mix in some other trades that didn't happen on deadline day, a couple of noteworthy ones before that. With me to do so, Drew Dinkmeyer. Dink, how's it going?
It's going well, as you would expect after the bombshell trade over the weekend. A little bit of an underwhelming trade deadline day. A lot of kind of secondary pieces move. We did get Jimmy Butler finding a new home, but it's good to look in the trade deadline kind of in totality and evaluate kind of what teams have done, and that's what we're going to do in today's episode.
Yeah, interesting. The two best teams, you would say OKC and Boston, now that the Cavs aren't thriving, sat on their hands, except for leaving Daniel Tice. So I won't talk about them today, but let's talk about the winners here. The number one winner, I mean, it's not even close. We talked about the Luka side, but let's talk more about Mark Williams and picking him up. They did give up a first-round pick. They got rid of Dalton Connect, which I don't feel strongly about. I think you agree. It's a dice roll for sure. He's had back issues. He had the foot injury. He can't stay on the court. But, man, when he's on, he's on. He's got major defensive issues. And like I said yesterday during the content, Nico Harrison says we're winning with defense. The Lakers are winning with offense, and a lot of it, they're going to be really dangerous from an offensive perspective. What do you think of the Mark Williams trade to go with Luka Doncic and LeBron James?
I thought it was interesting on a couple fronts for the Lakers. On the optimistic side of things, not only has Mark Williams, played really, really well on the offensive end this year when he's been available, he's also shown a little bit more durability than we've seen in the past, piling up, games with minutes into the mid 30s. He's such an incredibly explosive big man athlete with like incredible reach and length that the defensive side of the ball, the numbers are just confusing. He's been one of the worst rim protectors in the league. He doesn't contest a lot of shots. It's really confusing considering how impactful he is on the offensive boards and just rebounding in general. And so the verticality, there's not a player that has more verticality in the league potentially to pair with Luka Doncic than Mark Williams. And alongside that, the timelines match up. Mark Williams was the youngest player in this trade, younger than Dalton Connect. And so matching his timeline with Luka Doncic makes a lot of sense. And on top of that, there were, quotes from Rob Pelinka saying that the center market was pretty dry. There weren't really a lot of opportunities, partially because of salary matching, that if they would have been looking at some of these more expensive centers, they wouldn't have had kind of the salaries to be able to match things and make things work. So they found a solution that works for this year, potentially matches up with their timeline, and has a ceiling to him in terms of explosive offensive capabilities, but also athleticism that you would hope could translate eventually into actual defensive production. And that'll ultimately be kind of the measuring stick for this deal, is durability and defensive production for Mark Williams. I think it was a swing worth taking. I think they, in totality around this trade deadline, they accrued so much excess value by acquiring Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis in a single first that if they gave up a little bit more value than they needed to secure Mark Williams here and secure kind of a long-term center option to pair with Luka Doncic, I think that was okay. And so the deal in and of itself, I thought, the price was on the heftier side. But the good news for the Lakers is when you've got Luka Doncic, that 2031 pick should be less of a concern, assuming that they can re-sign Luka and keep him in LA, which I would expect that they will be able to do. And Dalton Connect, he was a mid first round pick this year. He's an older, longer college tenure that kind of came in and was supposed to be ready right away, and he hasn't been that great right away. So, the ceiling on Dalton Connect's very low. I think, ultimately he's a rotation player, but not a starter in the NBA would be my guess. Giving that up with the rights to what could be, is a mystery first round pick, but most likely with Luka Doncic around is going to be towards the later half of the draft. I think that's a worthy price to pay for Mark Williams.
Yeah, I mean, just think about who else was in the market that even got rumored. I think the only name that comes to mind that would have been a great fit would have been Walker Kessler. You would imagine they made a lot of calls, and you would have imagined they made probably the same offer to the Jazz, and the Jazz probably said no. That was kind of my read on the situation. But, and then, Dalton Connect is one of the worst defensive players in the league already, and you got Austin Reeves, you got Luka. You don't have defense at all. Like, he's kind of a pretty bad fit with the team. So I think it's totally fine. Again, it's a dice roll, but hey, scared money don't make money. I thought it was a pretty good move to just kind of get him in there. Just because, again, you can't find 23-year-old centers and like get them for free who have upside. It's just not out there. So it's not like they gave up that much. They just got two guys I thought a little under market. Mark Williams wasn't on the block, and they made enough of an offer to get them. Again, there's major downside, but I think it was a worthwhile move there. Where do the Lakers sit for you? We talked about it yesterday with them being our Lakers don't make the playoffs bets got considerably worse
Yeah,
here.
they're
Where do
dead.
they stack up with we joke that they have under a 7% chance to make a title, but like what are the chances they kind of get out of the first round and maybe make a run for the Western Conference Finals?
I think they'll probably get out of the first round, would be my guess. They're going to be very, very dangerous. Obviously, they will be taking some time to kind of figure out the fit with Luka and LeBron, but offensively, they're going to be extremely dangerous, obviously. And then, defensively, we'll see. They're going to put pressure on opponents from a defensive perspective just with how good their offense is. And so that's ultimately, going to be the way that they try to win games is by controlling the boards. They're still going to be a very big team, just like the size at all positions is going to be above average here. When you're talking about Luka and LeBron and Mark Williams and Austin Reeves and Dorian Finney-Smith or Rui Hachimura, like it's just size everywhere. So they should be able to rebound the basketball well. They'll have trouble, forcing turnovers. But they're going to really force you to execute from an offensive perspective just because they have so much length. And we know that the games slow down in the playoffs as well. So the places that they're going to be vulnerable, they're going to be really vulnerable in transition during the regular season. But the games slow down a little bit in the playoffs. So perhaps that will help them there. I think, in terms of title odds or odds to get out of the Western Conference, a lot of this will ultimately depend on seeding and how far they can ascend. They do have a very, very difficult second half of the season schedule that includes a 6 games in 8-night stretch because of rescheduling due to the fires in LA. They're currently in the 5th spot in the Western Conference, but tied in the loss column with Denver and Houston so they could get as high as 3rd would be reasonable. And if they got into the 2nd or 3rd range, then I think you start to feel pretty confident that, this team could win a playoff series, maybe win 2 playoff series and be right back there in the Western Conference Finals. I still think the teams that they're going to be vulnerable to. I think OKC is a team that they're going to be vulnerable to. I think in some ways, like I'm interested to see how they match up with Memphis, but Memphis has a lot of athleticism that would be, I think, pretty challenging for them. Houston would be kind of a mix of different styles in terms of offense versus defense that would be very interesting. But I mean, look, LeBron James and Luka Doncic as 2 players, when you're talking about a 7-game series, 2 of the smartest basketball players that we've had in the last few decades, they're going to figure out ways to kind of break you down defensively. So they're going to be a very, very tough out. I think the gauntlet of going through the Western Conference and then having to potentially face off a Boston or a Cleveland or that type of team in the finals, reduces the overall odds of kind of winning the title here just naturally. But in general, I mean, they're a very, very strong team. And if we were talking about them out of the Eastern Conference, I'd say, look, they could, if everything goes right, they could be in that Cavs Boston category. So I think the upside is still really, really compelling. We'll see how it kind of plays out. But the Lakers not only made themselves a much bigger threat 2, 3, 4 years from now with these trades, I think they made themselves a commensurate threat, if not bigger threat than they were a week ago in terms of competing for this year. So I think all around, just like they didn't sacrifice the present for the future. Thought they did a great job here at the trade deadline. I think they're a big winner. And just should note on the Charlotte side, just because the Lakers here are a big winner does not mean that I think Charlotte was a loser. I thought Charlotte did a really nice job. They kind of capitalized on Mark Williams' value, near its high point. They're not in a contention window right now. Yeah. They also picked up picks from Phoenix over the course of the draft, kind of unloading players on Phoenix just over and over again. So I thought Charlotte had a solid deadline, nothing to write home about, but I think getting off of some of the risk of Mark Williams for more draft capital and continuing to build up first round picks makes a lot of sense for where Charlotte is in kind of their rebuild process as well.
Yeah, it's not like they sold really under market. I think that was a fair price for Mark Williams. That's what they were going for, getting a first round pick. It was well done. A lot of teams traded solid rotation players, not upside that Mark Williams has. So yeah, it was a fair trade, but just from a team building perspective, definitely like what the Lakers did. Which I think you could say the same for this next trade with the Warriors and the Heat making a big trade. Jimmy Butler headed to the Warriors in a mega 5-team trade with Miami picking up Andrew Wiggins as the main piece there. Obviously, Jimmy Butler with Steph Curry. Steve Kerr already said that Jimmy's going to run the offense in the non-Steph minutes. Quite a fit, quite a different style. Steve Kerr talks a lot about not putting enough pressure on the rim, not drawing enough free throws. Guess what? You got a great player there. Jimmy said he's not taking any more suspensions. So shout out to Jimmy. Going to wear number 10 for Neymar. What do you think of this trade? Certainly a pretty big swing for the Warriors, who I'll just say, it was tough to share their teams getting traded in Utah, and they really blew another loss. But Jimmy adds a lot of maturity and just somebody else to help Steph. It was very, very useful.
Yeah, I think, ultimately, if you look at kind of what the Warriors' options were and what the cost associated with, getting a star player or someone in to kind of help, I think this was about as good as it gets for the Warriors side of things, right? They didn't end up, getting rid of Kuminga, which was the big, draft, long-term piece that they're kind of looking for. They didn't give up a ton of draft capital in terms of, having to move on from this trade. Just one first-round pick in this one, and then they gave up, Dennis Schroeder, who they had traded for spare parts to acquire. They gave up Andrew Wiggins, who was a salary match, and obviously Andrew Wiggins has been a big part of helping them win a championship and played very well in that playoff run, but has had his inconsistency issues, his durability issues, and just doesn't have the ceiling of Jimmy Butler come playoff time. And then you talk about the fit in terms of what Golden State has built their identity off of. It's kind of toughness. It's kind of, will wear you down mentally. We'll be more prepared for you in a playoff series. Jimmy brings all those things to the table. And you look about the holes that they have in terms of offensive issues. It's getting to the basket, putting pressure on the paint, and getting to the free throw line, as you alluded to. So if Jimmy plays at the level that he's played in previous years, which I think is a legitimate question mark, we can write off this whole season for Jimmy as, he's unhappy, he's acting up, like this is all these different things, and that's why he's not playing kind of at the same level we've seen Jimmy play at it before. He can turn it on, and that's certainly the case. I don't want to say that's not the case at all with Jimmy Butler, but he's also 35, and he's played a ton of basketball. The Tibbs years, even the Miami years, playing really heavy and deep into the playoffs and carrying teams in the playoff runs. So there's a question of is there kind of legitimate aging and deterioration kind of going on with Jimmy? I'm very excited to see he's a very good off-ball mover, super, super smart. So I think in a motion system, he's going to thrive, especially with split cuts and backdoor cuts and different things like that. And he's very good at passing to cutters as well. So I think, the fit is really, really intriguing. And I think the upside is really fun. And I think it gave the Warriors life in a season that was sort of breathless and was kind of wandering. Now, they still have a lot of room to make up here. They're currently 11th in the Western Conference, tied for 10th with the Sacramento Kings. But you look at a lot of the, tiebreakers, a lot of the schedule. They've played 5 more home games than road games to this point in the season, and they've got a lot of ground to make up. And to get out of the play-in, they'd have to make up at least 3 games in the standings over the Clippers, Dallas, Phoenix, Sacramento. Some of those teams potentially getting worse here at the deadline. They might be able to do that, but most likely this is probably going to be a team that ends up in the play-in. And because they're most likely going to be in the play-in, we're talking about also a team that is most likely to play if they get into the playoffs in Oklahoma City, or we'll see if Memphis can kind of hold on to the 2 seed, but like a really, really strong opponent in round 1. So they've got a tall task in front of them, but I'm interested to see how this plays out. And they do get the extension to keep Jimmy happy here for the time being. We'll see how long that keeps Jimmy happy. A 2-year extension means that he'll be happy for 1 year. In the second year, who knows? So there's a lot here to digest, but I think ultimately a good move for Golden State. I don't think there were moves that would have cost this little for them to take a shot at upside and kind of resalvage the season, or this smaller window that they still have with Steph and Dre.
Yeah, and I don't know about that extent. That's a lot of money for guys to be 37 at the end of it. So that was kind of a sticker shock to me when that came through, and it's interesting that came down like right after the trade got announced. But yeah, I don't have much to add. Obviously, it's that classic, ceiling raiser, and I think a floor raiser. Maybe not a floor raiser just because Jimmy missed
Yeah.
missing time, and he's just so much older. But it definitely, the team they had wasn't going to make a run, and then just on paper, Jimmy's a pretty good fit with Steph, I think, just because he has kind of an inside game and he gives them just what they needed with, like I said, the rim pressure and the free throw drawing. So, like the trade, pretty much echo your thoughts. Still got a major uphill hill to climb here. There on the Miami side, I thought it was a good trade. I thought that getting Andrew Wiggins and some pieces, I didn't have a problem with it. And they got something, so that's really all it is for me. Like Jimmy would have sat out the whole season. So to get Andrew Wiggins, a player they desperately needed, they're playing Haywood Highsmith. They're trying to find an on-ball defender so bad, so much so they're playing Pelle Larson for like, oh, we need a spark on-ball defense. Go put Pelle Larson out there. So it's a thing they really needed. So I like what they did.
Yeah, and I think their goal has been to try to maintain some flexibility. And the Andrew Wiggins cap hit is going to be essentially like half of what Jimmy Butler's cap hit was going to be. So from a financial flexibility standpoint, they maintain that. I think they also they got their kind of players back. Like Kyle Anderson is their kind of player in terms of a player that kind of will do all the little things, will kind of compete out there. We'll bring it on the defensive end like a true professional, and then you've got on the other side they get Andrew Wiggins as well, a player that 3-and-D and kind of like toughness. So I think they did okay. I mean, I think if you're grading them on the curve of Jimmy's held them hostage, yeah, I think they did okay.
Yeah.
If you grade them on the curve of, well, they brought a terrorist into the room to hold them hostage, like they did this to themselves, right? We've seen this with Jimmy every time when he gets into the final year of his contract. If the contract situation is not resolved, there's a problem. And so they had to have had an idea that this was a risk that they willingly embraced coming into the season. They didn't really get Jimmy a lot of help to push this thing forward. They started to turn the reins over to Tyler Hero a little bit more offensively. They don't give him his extension. You can't be surprised that this is the end result of all of that based on the history of Jimmy Butler. So I think it depends on like kind of when you're grading Miami off of all this. I think they ended up sort of salvaging, but ultimately just a really tumultuous last 2 years in what was a highly successful Jimmy Butler tenure. And if you remember, when the Heat acquired Jimmy Butler the first time, they were in dire straits with their organization. I mean, they had given Hassan Whiteside a bunch of money. They were considered a team that had all this like dead roster space and dead cap space and like no assets to kind of rebuild. And Jimmy helped elevate them to 2 finals during the time that he was there. So, the totality of the Jimmy Butler experience in Miami was a positive. The last year and a half, I think, was really mangled in terms of from a front office perspective, and a little bit of arrogance in terms of what they thought their culture would be able to kind of weed out. I think they should have tried to be more proactive in terms of moving Jimmy earlier and kind of come to grips with, okay, if we're not going to pay him, we need to reset this thing a little bit earlier. They didn't do it. They get hit. They basically have lost this season for that to some extent. We'll see if they can like make a little bit of a run in the East with actual players that want to participate for them. But ultimately, I think they did okay under the construct of Jimmy holding them hostage. But they really kind of butchered the last year and a half of Jimmy Butler's tenure in Miami.
Yeah, really just the last year with Jimmy being out saying, and then Pat Riley with the comments that he should have been out there and all that stuff. And then to your point, I mean, this is what they signed up for. And you don't need to research it. Anyone who like knows the NBA has heard the Jeff Teague story where Jeff Teague's talking about, Jimmy Butler in practice when he wanted to get traded saying, oh, I'm not playing with those guys. Let me play with the G League guys. Like Jimmy's going to Jimmy. So, yeah, I mean, they got good stuff. So, like, again, given grading on the curve, I like that how you said that. I think they did fine. So, not really a winner considering the circumstances, but I'm pretty happy with it. Okay, the next real winner, the Cleveland Cavaliers get DeAndre Hunter off of the Hawks pretty cheap at George Niang, who was in the rotation, but not like a clear winner. Karis LeVert's been pretty valuable for them. trouble staying on the court there, which is a problem for DeAndre Hunter. But what do you make of this DeAndre Hunter fit here? I mean, he fits a lot of ways here. I love this
Yes.
trade. What do you think?
Probably the most historically trade deadline-y trade of all of the trades that we've gotten, right? Like the Luka Doncic one is not that's there's no historical precedent for that trade. The Jimmy Butler trade, that's not usually the type of trade we get at the trade deadline, like a player holding their team hostage. This one is the classic young team that's contending, pushing their chips in the middle with a player that fits against their other contenders in their conference that they need to be able to get past the other title contenders in terms of helps round out their roster. I think they needed big switchability wing defense to be able to deal with Boston, to potentially be able to deal with whoever comes out of the West. DeAndre Hunter has, proven himself to be able to stay healthy this season, despite kind of all the listings with knee soreness and different issues that he's kind of battled throughout the year. He's played really effectively, the league's leading scorer off the bench this year. He shot the ball really well from three. So this is a home run for me for the Cavs. As long as DeAndre Hunter is able to stay healthy, the pieces that they gave up, Karis LeVert, yes, he's been very impactful defensively this year. Yes, he has some secondary ball handling to them. They got and developed a lot of secondary ball handling from Ty Jerome in the second unit. And so Ty Jerome's ascension this year has allowed them to have Karis LeVert kind of as an extra asset that they didn't really need much of. George Niang, that was a contract that they had kind of gone out there and spent in free agency to get that bigger four because they need a stretch four to stretch the floor and shoot. But George Niang had his own issues defensively in terms of being able to stay out there. And so DeAndre Hunter is George Niang with defense and more offense on top of that. So, get rid of kind of a redundant roster spot in Karis LeVert with Ty Jerome's ascension, get the defense and the length in the shooting to replace George Niang. Just perfect fit for Cleveland. I thought this was an excellent trade. They've continued to do a really, really great job at managing the roster and building the roster since LeBron's last departure from Cleveland. With the Donovan Mitchell trade, with the drafting of Evan Mobley, with the Jared Allen trade. They've just done a really, really nice job. It seems like every transaction that they've made over the last 3 to 4 years has been really, really solid. Just a lot of solid moves that haven't really put them in a lot of harm's way, and they've built a really nice roster that is going to contend to go to the finals this year.
Yeah, adding another wing piece on defense is really valuable. And as you kind of hinted at there, what do you need to get out of the East? What do you need to beat Boston? You need wing defense. So just a classic, think you get a little down the line value, a little bit of just what a great fit. I mean, a team that is, I've talked about this a couple times in matchups. They're like middle of the pack in catch and shoot volume, but they're the best or second best. Them and the Suns are like 1 and 2 in catch and shoot frequency. Catch and shoot. They're like the best catch and shoot team per possession, but they don't get enough of them. Now they're going to get more of them, and they're going to help their defense. And he just fits their team so perfectly. Fills in 3-4, which is a bit of a weak spot because they're so good with their 4-5s, so good with their 1-2s. Absolutely love this trade. Yes, you got injury concerns, but I this is just such a home run. Shocked they didn't have to give up first rounder there. So absolutely love it. On the Hawks side, what do you make of this? I mean, I'll just say, if you're in a fantasy league, I think George Niang might be like a pickup because they just have no fours. But what do you think about just the Hawks side? And actually, just going with the Cavs, does this put them over Boston for you, or it's kind of the same story?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Certainly draws them a lot closer. I still think Boston's ceiling is at a different level, but Boston's been, struggling through the dog days of the season here. I would still take Boston over Cleveland at this point in the season, even with Cleveland having home court advantage in a playoff series. But I do think that gap has narrowed with this acquisition. On the Atlanta front, they're in a tough situation, obviously having no control over their pick and that going to the Spurs with the DeJounte Murray trade, and then having Jalen Johnson get hurt this year and sort of reassessing. I think there were no great options for Atlanta here. And obviously they moved a lot of pieces at the deadline with DeAndre Hunter, with Bogdan Bogdanovic. I think ultimately they viewed the DeJounte Murray trade and the pick that they've lost there as a sunk cost and just kind of moved on. And I think that is something that's worthy of praise, because a lot of teams don't do that, don't view things as sunk costs and kind of moved on. DeAndre Hunter was a player that they were having a really hard time moving last year from a salary perspective because of the perception of his health. And so they got a healthy half a season from him and then kind of cashed that in. And I think that's okay from a roster build perspective. Bogdan Bogdanovic, another player that they sort of cashed in terms of, health concerns and contract concerns. And they get Terrence Mann, a younger player that was like very highly coveted just a few years ago. I mean, if we just rewound like a year and a half and said like they got Terrence Mann and they got off DeAndre Hunter's money, we'd all be like, whoa, that was a really good deal for Atlanta. So I think they're zooming out. They're trying to take a little bit of a longer view of things. Obviously, this frees up more space to continue to develop Zachary Risache in the second half of the season. They're kind of going through building the young core around Trae Young, Zachary Risache, Onyeka Okongwu, and then trying to recoup draft capital that they lost in kind of the DeJounte Murray deals. But the DeJounte Murray era really kind of threw this team back in a meaningful way. And unfortunately, we'll see if there's ramifications to that in terms of, I should say Dyson Daniels as well, in terms of young player that they're building around as well. He's been fantastic this year. But ramifications in terms of like, is Trae Young going to want to stay through this? Like that remains the cloud kind of hanging over. But I think after the DeJounte Murray deal, since they've moved on from him, I think they've made a lot of rational individual decisions. I think they're just still hamstrung by that original DeJounte Murray acquisition. They're still feeling the pains and the effects of that. But ultimately, like getting Dyson Daniels, getting Zachary Risache, getting Onyeka Okongwu, are getting out from under the DeAndre Hunter contract, the Bogdan Bogdanovic contract, getting Terrence Mann in the mix. I think these are all like small wins for a team that was in a pretty bad spot.
Yeah, and I'm a little worried Trae's going to want to stay. We go through this song and dance like every summer, and it's gotten a little bit worse. Like they're not getting any better, and I think that more talent went out than came in. Terrence Mann hasn't been good this year, and then Karras has been like fine. It's not like they got anything. They didn't get anything. They didn't get anything like good back. So I don't really. Like it. When we talked about how much the Cavs got better, the Hawks really didn't. So.
The one thing you can look at for I don't disagree. The one thing you can look at for Atlanta from this perspective is like going into next season, Trae Young can say, hey, we have Dyson Daniels, we have Jalen Johnson, we have Onyeka Okongwu, we have Zachary Risache, hopefully taking a leap here. I can be the anchor to kind of hold this together, and then we'll get through this period of time where we're without the draft capital and we'll kind of rebuild. And I think there's some hope there. I mean, Daniels, Jalen Johnson, Risache, Onyeka Okongwu, that's a good start. So, like, I think there's, we'll see how Trae feels. And like the other thing about Trae in terms of like wanting to leave and whatnot, if that does come to fruition, he's an interesting player for teams to try to build around. He's got his own limitations kind of defensively. He's, we haven't seen smaller guards lead you to the promised land. So teams have been a little bit more hesitant to pay full price for those types of guards in the trade market. So ultimately, like we'll see. I think you could say that some of this deadline will be impacted by whether it has an impact on Trae Young's willingness to be with the Hawks in the future.
And we could transition that to another winner, which is sort of a winner from this trade, is the Spurs. We talked about the impact of De'Aaron Fox. We love it. We don't need to really talk about it again. But we talked about the Hawks getting worse. Guess what? The Spurs had their pick. So that's another way the Spurs are kind of a winner there. So I just love it. We don't really need to add more to De'Aaron. Go back to listen to the last pod if you want to add anything on that, or just something if you maybe wanted to touch on. Or first thoughts. We saw De'Aaron Fox, get a win out there in the first unit.
Yeah.
His role was awesome. I think he had 19 potential assists. Only 10 drives. Didn't drive it a lot, but a lot of touch time. Looked like a classic point guard next to Chris Paul. So I thought that was interesting. Yep. So any first thoughts on De'Aaron Fox?
I just love that De'Aaron Fox knew the draft capital and the assets in the interview after the game. He was like, yeah, we really wanted to win this one because we have their pick. I just love that. I love that De'Aaron Fox kind of knows the transaction side of things for San Antonio and the importance. Yeah, I thought the first game looked good. I'm excited to watch more. I'm interested to see if they continue with this fit with Chris Paul and De'Aaron Fox next to each other. It's a lot of trust in Stephen Castle as well. It sounds weird, but to move him to the bench and to say, hey, like you're the lead, ball handler in the second unit and kind of the lead offensive player there. But yeah, their future is as if it couldn't be any brighter when Victor Wembanyama is in the room. Now you've got De'Aaron Fox, you've got this draft asset, you've got Stephen Castle. I mean, they have like, a 10%, 15% chance of landing Cooper Flag
Yep.
with Victor Wembanyama. Like, I mean, that we're talking about
Oh
like
my god.
decade
Yeah.
of dominance. So they are in. It's a great time to be a San Antonio Spurs fan, and I think the deadline went very, very well for them.
hmm And yeah, just too bad for the Hawks, man. You get Wemby and then Ricochet and then Flag. They
Yeah,
get kind of stuck with the
yeah,
generational talent there. So speaking of losers, I guess we're calling Hawks kind of a not as much as these guys, but the Suns. I think you think they're a bigger loser than I do. They had to get off Nurk. They had to do it, and you almost had to put a first round pick. You had to, because he's under contract next year. They're trying to build this
yeah,
team out. It is what it is. Like this is what they made their bed and they got to sleep in it. Is kind of my thought. Yes, they're clearly a loser. They didn't make any big swings. Although I think Cody Martin was like kind of a low key helpful pickup in this trade. Certainly needed another defender really bad. Ryan Dunn's like really lost his mojo, as well. But but yeah, this Nurkic trade they really screwed it up and they had to pay the piper to get off him. So they got worse. And they got a first round pick out the door. Like, how could you call them? You have to call them a loser? But anything else you
yeah.
want to add on the Sun? Just getting worse.
Well, it's not just this Nurkic trade to me. It's the trade with the Utah Jazz where they trade
Yep.
their 2031 unprotected first for 3 late firsts that they then do nothing really with. Like
Mm-hmm.
like they send another first out the door with Nurkic. They get Nick Richards using one of these first. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was a wild use of assets to me. They had one bullet left in the chamber to be able to fire, and that was their 2031 unprotected first. They turn that into nothing that's very
Yep.
useful in terms of being like that. The things that they have at their disposal now can maybe get them a role player,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they can't do anything to continue to help build out this roster, and they're financially constrained. They weren't able to get off the Bradley Beal contract. So the future of the Suns, I think this experiment is nearing the end. Like we
Yep.
also had Kevin Durant being pursued and them talking about and flirting with trade ideas with Kevin Durant. Like they're talking about, the ideas were bantered around about Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler. Like, what is even going on
Mm-hmm.
here in Phoenix? So they just look like a team that went all in on something that very quickly they're finding out is not working. And now the one asset that they had that they could potentially use to turn into other things, unless they're going to totally reset and trade Booker or Durant or something like that, they turned into really nothing. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
use it for anything. So like, what was the point of getting those 3 firsts if you didn't have it lined up for something else that was going to help facilitate either getting off of Bradley Beal or kind of getting here? And I guess you could say, well, they got off Nurkic, they saved a bunch of financial flexibility from that perspective. Yeah, that's great, but that wasn't the plot. That wasn't what this was supposed to be about. So for me, in totality of the trade deadline, they lost their best asset. What do they have to gain for it? Okay, they now have Nick Richards and they have some more financial flexibility. That's a huge loss to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as big of a loss as Dallas losing Luka Doncic, but it's a huge loss. And I think you could pretty much close the book on this Phoenix Suns era. It's going to be a long road out of it, would be my guess.
Yeah, those picks 2025, 27, 29 are the least favorable of the Cavs for all three, the Wolves for all three, and then the Jazz. So like they can't like if it goes perfect, like they can't pick like top four, like absolutely perfect, and they're not going to. Like those are going to be like 25 or later. So yeah,
Yeah,
3 25 or later for potentially the number one pick. Potentially, it's probably going to be like a top 10 pick. I take that trade all day. For a Jazz team that like the Jazz didn't really do anything. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but yeah, I
yeah,
like that trade for Utah. We talked about the Mavericks a little bit. We'll talk more about them. Let's talk about them. We don't really talk, but they're clearly a loser. Like you trade Luka Doncic
yeah,
and you get an older Anthony Davis, and you didn't get a lot of assets back. Like we already went over it. We're furious. We freaking brought John Daigle on to talk about how bad of a trade it was. It's bad. And then oh man, the TNT report from Alley the Force saying like, oh, the people in the front office are like worried about their jobs. Like that's how bad the trade is. Like people who work for the Mavericks are like, oh my god, I'm not going to lose my job. Like you really made a bad trade.
Yeah, I mean, the lack of continuity there in terms of the organization, in the quotes from Nico Harrison, which we talked about in the press conference, the quotes around ownership being surprised, Mark Cuban's quotes about, I don't know why we did this either. Basically, like, there's just a lack of continuity in that organization right now that's very, disheartening. They're having to potentially offer refunds to existing season ticket holders. Like, it is a bad situation. Then on top of that, we're going to trade a 24-year-old and attach a pick to him for a 29-year-old that most people thought the contract value around the league, the rest of his contract is a negative value, in Caleb Martin, who's also hurt, by the way. So like, yeah, just no, and just positionally, all we're getting is 3s, 4s, and 5s, and we're trading more guards when we don't have guards. So I really don't know what they're doing. They had a very nice win in Boston last night. They still have a very good team as constructed with Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis. Clay finally started shooting in a way that suggests, like, okay, if we get this version of Clay, like, maybe there's some life here. Dallas still has a season on their hands, so that's why, to me, they're not as big of a loser as Phoenix. But ultimately, like 3-4 years from now, we're probably going to be in this spot with Dallas where we're like, hey, you're where Phoenix ended up. Like, it just took you 3 or 4 years to get there. What can you get in the meantime? And that's really the question for Dallas. But yeah, disastrous trade deadline, losing Luka Doncic, losing a big part of your fan base in terms of the way that they have confidence, and then having, no sort of continuity or trust within the front office. It even sounds like within the front office, it's fractured between like Nico Harrison and the closest people he works with, and then the rest of the front office. And so, like, just it seems like a very toxic culture right now in Dallas, and one that is really all in on this version of this team with Anthony Davis. We'll see, hopefully, him make his debut over the weekend for the Mavericks.
Yep. Definitely with you there. I don't know. I hate this trade so much, man. You just don't see players getting just like, he got traded for less than like Rudy Gobert. It's so
Yeah.
bad.
It all depends on how you value Anthony Davis and how many picks.
Sure.
If they turned around Anthony Davis and were able to trade, but like, it certainly was light on compensation.
Yeah. All right, and the last team we're going to talk about. Hey, again, the Bulls are losers. What else is new? My God, the Silva's press conference is unbelievable. Saying it's like worth it to be in the play-in hunt. I mean, get out of here, bro. Like, I can't. I know you and Winky and all the Bulls fans out there listening. Like, I love the Chris Rock. That Tiger didn't go crazy. The Tiger went Tiger. Like that. Carnisova's what Carnisova's, man. It's just, we've seen this.
Yeah.
How does he still have a job, man? Like, I thought he was
because he's doing what ownership wants, Mike.
Yeah,
he's doing what ownership wants. Like, the thing that people need to understand about the Chicago Bulls is that Jerry Reinsdorf, the things that he cares about most is just having the ability to sell tickets to the very loyal and loving fans of the Chicago Bulls, and a brand that has been built over decades by Michael Jordan, by Scottie Pippen in those 90s Bulls teams, and still has fans from around the world that will come to Chicago to see the Bulls play. He just wants to be able to sell tickets. If it's selling the hope of playoffs and play-in and getting maybe a little bit of extra playoff revenue, fine by him. In terms of trying to build out a winner, no, not interested. What does he want most? He doesn't want to spend money, and he doesn't want to he doesn't want to like kowtow to players. This is why you like Jerry Krause so much. And we can all look through The Last Dance to kind of understand the relationship there. But ultimately, this is what the ownership wants. The ownership wants a team that is as cheap as possible, that can sell as little a glimmer of hope to keep people coming to the games. And their attendance levels are still good on the whole. So like, Bulls fans need to stop going to games. That's the only thing that's going to change things here, because this is what they want. Coming through this trade deadline and coming out with just retaining their own pick to be able to save face in case that they make a play-in push was the most likely outcome for this idiotic, decrepit franchise. This was the most likely outcome, that they would absolutely choose this route to fake contend for like the 5th year in a row of fake contention while they're not trying to build an actual winner. And the quote around, you can build a couple of different ways. You can build with like 9 or 10 good players, or you can build with 2 or 3 stars. And they're like, we're trying the 9 or 10 good players. That is so insane to put out there, because one, you're not even close to 9 or 10 good players. You might be close to 9 or 10 guard players, not good players. And then on top of that, you're saying we're not interested in the best players. We're going to try to go the route of building the team without the best players. What are you doing?
Yeah.
What on earth are we even doing here? We're like, oh yeah, we're not going to be interested. They're prepping the fan base for, hey, we're not trying to get stars. We're not trying to get stars. If we run into a star because of the draft, like that would be great. But we're not trying to get stars. We're just trying to get good players. So like, oh, Lonzo Ball, yeah, we'll extend him. That's great. Ayo Dosunmu, we'll extend him. He's a good player. Kobe White, he's a good player. It doesn't matter that they all play the same position. This franchise is selling a broken dream to the Chicago Bulls fan base. And all of you, I beg of you to stop taking it. Mm-hmm. Stop going to games. Please stop paying Jerry Reinsdorf money with your hard-earned money, with tickets. Stop supporting this team. There's no reason. They don't care about you. They are uninterested in supporting you. You got to stop supporting them. That's where I've been for the last 3 or 4 years with the Chicago Bulls. They tug at my heartstrings as a kid, so I still want to see them, get lucky into a Cooper Flag. But even if they got lucky and win the lotto and get Cooper Flag, they're going to screw it up.
Yep.
This team, they have no intention of running a good organization and trying to win basketball games long term. There's no process in place here to try to be good long term. So another trade deadline goes past where they don't maximize value. All they do is kind of keep the dream alive of fake contention. Don't garner any additional assets. Extend Lonzo Ball, a nice recovery story, whatever. That'll be something that they can sell fans. It's just a disaster with the Chicago Bulls, and unfortunately, it's very predictable. It's the same BS that they do every year.
Why even trade Levine then if you're going to do this? Like, why not just
because the number one narrative that they are fighting with their fans is the idea of losing control of this pick. So the only thing that they wanted to do was regain control of this pick so that they can say, look, if we limp into the play and it's not that bad because we still have our pick. We didn't lose the pick. But they're not trying to maximize the idea of getting into the maximum odds for a Cooper Flag, for a generational talent. They just want to toe the line of like, let's hope we get lucky, because they got lucky once with Derrick Rose with the playoff lottery balls. And in the meantime, like, be competitive enough that people will keep coming to the games, because there'll be a reason to keep coming to the games. And at some point, people got to stop coming to the games. Mm-hmm. That's the only way that this is gonna change things for Chicago.
Yeah, it's reeks of desperation for sure. But and it's crazy that like good players, it's look at like the NBA champions, man. Like the Celtics was a ridiculous roster. Joker, Curry, like it's just the teams that win the championship are like the best teams usually. The Warriors were just really good that one year. But anyways, so the other teams that I wanted to touch on, the Bucks made a huge trade, got off Chris Middleton and picked up Kyle Kuzma in this trade. The headline to me is like, I think they just lost all faith in Chris Middleton. Obviously, Chris Middleton's a better player and a better fit to me than Kuzma is. But hey, Kuzma can play 35 minutes in a game. Chris Middleton can't. So I thought that was really the whole story. We heard the comments from Doc Rivers saying how tired Brook Lopez was. At least Kyle Kuzma could play the floor a little bit and give him some size. So I don't really think they're a winner or loser. The loser to me is just the perception of Chris Middleton. Clearly, that was like the whole deal. So I don't think this makes them really worse or better. It probably makes them a little bit worse in the playoffs, but it may help them in the regular season just because at least Kuzma's going to be on the court. Any thoughts on the Bucks making a swap there?
Yeah, I think it's just sad is the easiest way that I'd put it. I mean, Chris Middleton's been such a core member of rebuilding things there. Obviously, wins a title in Milwaukee, has been a proven playoff producer. Last season even gave them a run at getting out of the first round without Giannis and without Dame because of his play against Indiana, a team that ends up going on to the conference finals. So it's sad that Chris Middleton's body is not allowing him to play at that level, because he is a heck of a player when he was physically healthy. I cannot say the same for Kyle Kuzma, who I know that there are hopes that when he's played in winning situations before, that he has contributed to winning. I think that those hopes are overstated in terms of what his actual contributions to winning on those Lakers teams were. He's generally been a negative impact player throughout his career, wherever he's gone, and he's having the worst year of his career by a wide margin. And it's not just on things that you're like, oh, maybe that's a really bad toxic system in Washington. It's like free throws. He's shooting free throws at like the worst clip he's ever shot, below like 60% this year. So like, I just think, yeah, he's durable, but he hasn't been good. And durable and not good isn't a great combination for winning basketball games. So maybe it helps in terms of they have a weak roster that doesn't have a lot of depth to it, and thus like you've got some hope of a player producing break even value instead of guaranteed giving it to players who are unlikely to produce even break even value. But there are so many different leaps we have to go to get Kyle Kuzma to break even player, like average NBA player, and not negative asset, that I'm skeptical of this being valuable. Like if I was looking at Milwaukee and I'm trying to win a championship, I'd rather have the hope of Chris Middleton being able to stay healthy than Kyle Kuzma personally. There's a lot of financial implications that change the equation here that help them a lot in terms of getting unlocking the 2032 pick with getting under the apron and whatnot. So like those financial ramifications, I think, are what make this deal okay to me. But ultimately, like, I don't think that they got better in terms of their potential to upset somebody in the Eastern Conference playoffs this year.
138 players have 27 minutes per game, and only Bilal Coulibaly, Bub Carrington, Jalen Wilson are worse. Just kidding. Kyle Kuzma's worse than all of them. I got you so good.
Yeah.
Kyle Kuzma, league worst, 48.8 true shooting percentage. The worst out of 138 players with 20. He's been awful. So,
yeah,
I don't know. I think it's kind of a yeah, I don't know. Maybe he'll snap out of it. But he's been terrible. But like I said, this is just like, oh, we got to get off Chris Middleton. He just doesn't have it anymore. So yeah, we'll see. Definitely they'll be in the playoffs. I think it's not bad. I think Dame and Giannis is kind of enough. And at least, again, you could kind of take it easy on those guys, just count them in the playoffs. Is kind of how I see it. We talked about Clippers picking up Bogdan a little bit. What do you think of this? We saw, again, man, they've been terrible the last couple of nights. So yeah. I think they kind of need it. We've seen this bench, Kevin Porter Jr. not the answer. Terrence Mann has been pretty bad this year. So it makes sense to me. I don't think it's like a great move, just kind of shaking it up a little bit.
Yeah, the thing that I'll note is like when they've looked bad of late, the way that they've looked bad is sort of transition defense and looking a little bit older just generally. And like, so Bogdan's not going to help there. Terrence Mann would have helped there, but he wasn't really playing in the rotation. I think just from the perspective of like, hey, like they got somebody who should play in the rotation for somebody who wasn't playing in the rotation. That's a positive. I think Kevin Porter Jr. is largely a negative player, so getting rid of him is a positive, just addition by subtraction. But Bogdanović has not looked healthy all season long. He's been really bad for the most part. So can they get him healthy in a way that his shooting can kind of make a difference? I think it does help to have a 3-point shooter like. They really lacked 3-point shooting when Norm Powell was kind of off the floor. And so now they have that as a secondary shooter beyond Norm Powell. I thought the move was fine. I don't think it was a big win by any means. They also got a bunch of second-round picks by taking on the Bogdan money as well. So I thought that was good. But yeah, I think if the Clippers, who were playing so well throughout the course of the early part of the season, so much of that was built on defensive identity, and that defensive identity since Kawhi has come back has slipped a little bit. So that's the big question mark for me, is like, can they re-find the defensive identity that they had early in the season? Some of this time without when Kawhi's come back, they've also lost Chris Dunn. He played much better last night from a defensive side in terms of kind of slowing down Tyrese Haliburton through the first 3 quarters. But I thought the move was fine. I didn't think it was like a big win. I thought similarly, like to the Clippers, I thought Philadelphia did a lot of small, nice things kind of on the periphery, getting themselves below the luxury tax, giving themselves the opportunity to participate in a buyout market that's very limited in terms of who can participate in the buyout market. Daryl Morey is very good at working around the edges of the collective bargaining agreement to figure out like where those edges are. And I thought he did a great job at the trade deadline. I think there's a lot of things that you can be critical of Daryl Morey's tenure over the last few years in terms of building around Joel Embiid and sacrificing things with Paul George. But one thing that guy does is every trade deadline, he is working the smallest transactions and maneuvers to free up the next thing that he can do down the road. And I just wish we saw more GMs doing that. There's so many GMs that were just sitting. I mean, Arturis in Chicago just sitting on his hands, just waiting. There's no setup for the next thing. And so I thought, Philadelphia, the Clippers, I thought they did some nice under the radar things, nothing that's going to wildly change the future of their organizations.
Yeah, the Clippers they're last in catch and shoot volume. I think that's why they did this. Bogdan's been a pretty good catch and shoot guy over the year, but he's been terrible this year. He's 13th out of 149 players on the bottom side, so he's bottom 10 percentile on catch and shoot 3 efficiency. And then like you said, I think the Sixers were like low key winners. I kind of like getting Quentin Grimes. And then like low key, picking up a very bad first round pick and getting 4 seconds. I thought that was kind of an interesting move.
And that also financially created a lot of flexibility for them. Like it's just a lot of small wins for Daryl that give them the chance to try to keep digging themselves out of the Joel Embiid hole, because that's a big hole to dig yourself out of.
Mm-hmm. And that's what you pay your GM to do, is to do the little deals like that. So always good where others just don't do it, which is what I want to end on. The Jazz don't get rid of Jordan Clarkson, don't get rid of John Collins, don't get rid of Colin Sexton. The Nets don't get rid of D'Angelo Russell. They don't get rid of Cam Johnson. We'll see if who wasn't going to get traded. We'll see if Ben Simmons gets bought out. The losers, I think, are us, the projection makers. We're going to have to deal with these teams and the tankers and sitting guys out again. It's going to be really, really annoying. I was really hoping, and Malcolm Brogdon not being bought out, like all these guys who were supposed to be buyout / trade candidates didn't really get traded. So it's going to make projections life a little tougher for us. Any thoughts on that stuff?
I think that's just the reality of the new collective bargaining agreement. A lot of these players that we're talking about, like, oh, we wish that that we moved on from them. Like, teams don't want to take on that salary for an extra year. And if Utah was to get off like Jordan Clarkson, most likely they're taking back salary that is longer term commitments than Jordan Clarkson to be able to do so. And teams just don't want to do that. So I think there's going to be less of those types of moves because there's fewer teams that can just kind of absorb the salary. And Utah is actually one of them that was used to absorb salary. So like, who's going to kind of, give up something meaningful for like a bench guard? It's just not going to happen. The value of draft picks has gotten too much. So I just think you're going to see fewer of these kind of, classic deadline deal trades because you need the salaries to kind of match in the long-term commitments, because picks aren't going to fly as fast and furious as they flew in years past. Like you already see, like so much of the trades that happen now are very heavily protected picks, swaps, all sorts of different things that are making sure that the value of the first round pick is really maintained. And so I think people understand that. So yeah, I think we're going to see less of that. From Brooklyn's perspective, if they weren't going to get the deal that they wanted for Cam Johnson, what's the point? What's the urgency in terms of moving Cam Johnson? He's still a positive contributor. This is where I think the Bulls are saying the same thing with Vucevic, where they're like, hey, we didn't get our price met. Well, you're not going to get your price met next year. Vuce is having like a career season in his best year. Like the price is not going to get improved from here for a 34-year-old, deeper into an expensive contract. Whereas with Cam Johnson, the price could potentially improve down the road. Jordan Clarkson, the price isn't going to improve. So, who knows what was out there for these guys? I know that I will give the benefit of the doubt to Danny Ainge. He's a guy that works on the peripheries to try to improve the long-term assets like repeatedly. So my guess is if they didn't move these guys, there really wasn't an opportunity to move them. There wasn't much interest in moving them. So I'm not going to penalize GMs that have been very good at trying to make these smaller deals in the past that weren't able to this time around. My guess is they just weren't there for them.
Yeah, and Justin Zanuck talked about the trade with the Suns we talked about earlier, and so the Jazz did something. I thought that they're like slight winners.
I thought that was I thought that's a big win. I mean, honestly, like if the best asset that Utah could have come out of this deadline with,
Yep.
they got. Yep. I don't know that there was a better asset that they could have gotten, even if you're like, oh, they traded John Collins, they traded Jordan Clarkson. I don't know. I don't think they could have done anything that's better than that unprotected.
Was that the best pick traded in the deadline? It might be.
I think so.
Because the 2020, yeah, nothing got traded this year is going to be higher, like because it's all. I think, and nothing's going to be like top. Well, this deadline cycle, like obviously the Hawks pick we talked about. It might be the best pick, so that's pretty good.
Yeah. So like I think they were big winners at the deadline, even though they didn't move off these pieces that seemed like, oh, maybe in the offseason, maybe you'll be able to get something for them at the deadline. But the league just didn't seem interested in it, and that's fine.
Yeah, for sure. And then I just want to talk Portland real quick. No trades. They won again last night, 10 of their last 11.
Yeah.
Are they making the play-in? Like, I mean, this team's been freaking crushing. But yeah, no deals there. I don't know, man. This team's dangerous, but they're playing so well. So I just wanted to shout them out. If you want to add anything there, we'll get out of here.
I don't think they're making the play-in, but it's nice to see younger players starting to play well here. They're still 3 games back of multiple teams there, and obviously San Antonio, who's right ahead of them, just got a lot better at the deadline with the De'Aaron Fox acquisition as well. So I don't think that's happening, but it's nice to see, as you know, we talked about in a pod a couple weeks back. It's nice to see teams with younger players building cohesiveness, getting experience winning games, building some intrigue and enthusiasm in a fan base. Like all of that is wonderful. I'd rather see more of that. So like I salute you, Portland. Yeah. The only team that's beaten you in the last 3 weeks is the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's the only team that's beaten Portland in the last 3 weeks. So yeah, they're playing great.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Anything else to mention to get us out of here?
As always, appreciate you guys listening. If you're on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, please consider leaving a rating and review. If you're interested in checking out the video version of this podcast, you can go to Establish Run NBA over on YouTube. Check out our smiling faces as we go through this trade deadline breakdown. If you're interested in any of the premium content for us, we're still going through the DFS side of things, the prop side of things through the All-Star break. We've got weekly, monthly subscription packages available for those products. Those billing cycles will be paused during the All-Star break. So just, if you buy a weekly pass, don't worry that you're not going to get the full value of the week or different things. We'll pause those. But we're really proud of all the work that we're doing on the projection side to power those 2 products. And yeah, check us out. Any of the premium products over at establishrun.com/subscribe-MBA for more details on our premium product offerings.
And actually, just as we're wrapping up here, Ben Simmons just got downgraded to out, not with team. So it might have a buyout candidate.
A buyout situation.
Maybe. Yeah, so that's interesting. We'll talk about that next week. Hey, maybe we'll talk more about the Blazers next week. Appreciate you guys listening. Catch you next time.